Um, Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Sarah O'Leary. I work with MyOsh and I'll be the host today. I'd like to say good morning to everyone, also good afternoon and good evening, because I think there are possibly people in America as well. A quick overview of our presenters today. Brian is a quality professional with over 40 years experience in quality management, certification and auditing processes and delivering auditor training. He has recently taken a 6-month posting from the UK to work for Bureau Veritas in Australia, and he's assisting with technical reviews, auditor competence, conducting audits and delivering auditor training with a particular focus on the new ISO 45001 for OH&S management systems. So Brian's going to provide you with an overview of 45001 requirements. He's going to give an understanding of the differences and relationships between the standards and information on how to manage a successful transition. Following Brian's presentation, Adrian Readiness is going to talk quite quickly. He's been involved in implementing safety management software for over 20 years, hundreds of organisations in a wide range of industries. He has extensive experience analysing, supporting, training, integrating and customising safety management systems into small and global multinational organisations. So Adrian's going to provide a quick snapshot of how organisations are using technology today to streamline ISO 45001 compliance and benefit from improved productivity and safety that those sort of systems offer. So I will hand over to Brian now and let you take charge, and just remind everyone to answer questions on the panel, and we'll get to those at the end. So Brian, are you there? Hello?
Yes, I am. Are you picking me up clearly?
Yes, we've got you. Thank you. You can fly away.
Right. So, good day, everyone. I hope my accent doesn't spoil the presentation too much. But let me start by welcoming you all to the webinar. It'll be a pleasure to go through the situation with you. So let me just quickly go through the slides that we've got, and I'll talk you through them. So first of all, we have the advertisement about Bureau Veritas, a company that maybe some of you haven't heard of, but as you see, we have a global presence. We've probably got about 76, maybe 79,000 employees now, because we're growing quite rapidly. And you see the areas that we're predominantly in. Yes, Europe has been a main focus, but we spread from a global point of view. Bureau Veritas, in addition to certification, it also has various other aspects to it, particularly commodities, consumer goods, and in-service inspection and verification. With the certification in Australia, you see that not only the standard certification, but also product, as well as second-party audits and auditor training in particular, is starting to develop within Australia. Here is a list of the various certifications that we can offer, and I would point out that we can also do awareness and auditor training on all of those. So if you have the opportunity to look at this later, you can assess if you need anything from there, and you can get in touch with us from there. So let's have a look at this summary presentation. So here are the stages that I want to go through, and it will give you an overview of how to get there, what it's about, what you might need to do, and how long it could possibly take. So what's this 45,001 about? First of all, I think it's interesting to understand that it now carries an ISO badge, which it hasn't previously. It's the first major standard to come out for addressing occupational health and safety, and as it says, we are looking to have an integrated approach with the other ISO 9000 management systems, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. It has this main goal as a high-level structure, but wants to remain generic because this is a worldwide application, and it has to consider culture and different legislation as well. They have simplified the language in the text to try and make it the same across all management systems. And we're going to talk about some of the new concepts where the ownership will very much be on leadership and worker participation. And we'll talk a little bit about risks and opportunities. The benefits will be for organizations to be able to demonstrate that leadership and commitment to health and safety, and looking at being able to control or eliminate the risks that workers have in a range of industries. The ability to improve your performance will also be shown through the registration that you will be able to show. I think as an overall, it's recognized by the International Labour Organization that there are roughly about 2.3, 2.5 million people die every year as a result of injury or illness through working activities. So you can see that there's a big push to try and get a more stable approach to how organizations control that situation. First of all, a little bit about the implementation time frame. It was formally issued in March this year after a protracted discussion through draft situations. From that date, there is a 3-year migration period where it will gradually replace 18001, and that is a deadline of March 2021. So organizations that have existing 18,000 need to start and consider when they're wanting to do that change. It's something that's reasonably straightforward, but organizations do tend to leave it until the last few months, and that's been shown with the changes to 9,000 and 14,000. There's a big rush towards the end to get organizations updated. So I would suggest that if we're thinking of doing that, we do it sooner rather than later. Now the last one, particularly for Australia, and this is one of the reasons that I saw took a little bit longer, is because some countries have different variations of health and safety standards, and not all of them are the same or cover all the requirements. I am aware that Standards Australia have their existing 4801, and I believe are now in the view of cancelling 4801 and having it replaced by 45,001. Now, if that is the case, I'm sure Mayosh will be able to give you some further detail on that. And I also believe that that will have its own 3-year probation period, not the same as the 45. So it could be extended a little bit further if organizations only have accreditation to 4801. So reasons for change. As we said in the top left, there's various versions of health and safety adopted by different countries. so there's a need to standardise. There's over 90,000 certificates in more than 120 countries, so you can see the spread of interest from that particular point of view. There is a need to harmonise management systems because organisations are increasingly having more than one management system accreditation. And secondly, the ability to integrate certification with quality and environment. As I said, a lot of organisations now have multiple standards, so it makes more sense to have a harmonisation between them. I did say before that there'd been a protracted period of time to try and get agreement, and here are some ideas as to why it did take so long. There are some countries where the approval of the draft was taking some time, because remember, a standard is made up of various committees and subcommittees, and each one tries to represent their own interests, whether it's individual or organisational. And there was a lot of difficulty with some of the wording in the standard to get agreement. There is different legislation in each country, which is where the standard tries to be more generic. And also the different approaches related to health and safety in the workplace. Some countries are extremely strong and robust, and others maybe not so. Not to say they don't care, just it doesn't go as far as some other countries. But also, there is a strong social demand for that. And if you think about the information the International Labour Organization put out, then you begin to see why, when so many people are suffering from that situation. So the new approach, integrated, as we've talked about with other standards, management system extended to all the operations of the organisation through management, leadership and participation. And we'll talk a little bit in detail about that later on. Also, it's covering a lot more of the legal and other requirements, and organisations are going to have to demonstrate that they understand what the legal requirements are and how they meet those requirements. So again, that would be a third party, either the certification body, looking at how organisations do that. The standard also brings in new concepts, particularly from an employee well-being situation, and also looking at risks and opportunities. Now, a lot of people get hung up on risks from a negative point of view, but what the standard's wanting organisations to do is look at them and turn them into opportunities rather than the negative approach. There's some common definitions with other standards, so it makes the ability to integrate so much easier. And also the context of an organisation and expectation of stakeholders is another particular focus which follows on from 9,000 and 14,000, with particular emphasis on how we outsource activities. There is an upward trend of organisations to subcontract various activities as extensions to themselves. And with health and safety, there's a particular focus on how we manage and control those situations. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. Here is the structure of the standard itself, and this Annex SL is the high-level structure that ISO has adopted for all its management systems, whether it be quality, environment, health and safety, information security, or food safety. They're all going to follow this particular approach, and they expect that this will remain in place for at least the next 8 to 10 years without change. So let's just briefly go through through this because I think this will make sense as we go through the rest of the slides. So first of all, the first three sections are standard in any standard. It's what the standard is intended to cover, any references from outside it uses, and then in particular, terms and definitions that are specific for the standard. And here is something that we need to consider because language is different and meanings can be different. And what the terms and definitions in the standard are as they relate to the standard. So if you have a different meaning in your organization or in your part of the world, then that needs to be identified. So from section 4 to 10, these are the actual requirements. And following on from ISO 9000, wanting to increase the awareness of the process approach, let's look at the way the standard has been developed as a process. So first of all, the context of the organization. This is really, what are we about as a company? What's our plan? What's our strategic aim? What is it that we do as an organization? From there, how are we going to do whatever we've decided we're going to do? So obviously, leadership play an important role here. And this is a particularly new focus for a lot of organizations. Typically, it would be the health and safety manager who would have the responsibility to put the system in place, but not necessarily have the authority to make it work. Here in the standard, it puts that responsibility firmly where it should be in the leadership situation. Number 6, now that we've got that in place, let's start planning how we're going to achieve what we do as an organization. Let's look at the risks. Let's look at the controls that we need to have in place, and let's look at a documented system that's going to work for us rather than just the auditor who's going to come along. And that's a particularly important aspect. Support. Now that we've got that in place, what other aspects or activities do we need? So the support to the process will come in terms of training, information, communication, and also documentation. And again, this is what we need as a company, not necessarily what we need to have in place for the auditor. Section 8 now talks, okay, now that we've got that established, now let's get on and do it and make sure we're doing it safely, make sure we're looking at emergency preparedness in case anything happens, and that we're able to respond, and also how we manage our contractors and suppliers. Section 9 now says, now that we've done it, how well did we do? So now let's have a look at evaluation, let's look at internal auditing, and let's have a management discussion just to see how we've done, what we need to do in the future, and then move into section 10 for how do we constantly improve our situation. So as a process, you can see that from 4 to 10, we're developing our management system, and 10 gives us the output of the process from an ongoing improvement point of view. So that's the logic behind the structure of the standard. So benefits and intentions in particular. It is there to reduce the number of work-related injuries, because clearly with that type of volume, there's not just the individual problem, but it's the knock-on effect it has to the business. We don't want to lose our key people, so we need to make sure that when they go home, they're going home safely. We want to develop this health and safety policy and put some objectives in there that people can work to and understand that it's for the benefit of the organisation. We want to be able to demonstrate leadership in our top management structure and a commitment to the health and safety of our workers within our system and how we control that. Let's look at the reduction of the risks of the activities that we have, and we can only do that once we fully evaluate what the activities are and what risks are associated with that. Then lastly, we want to improve the performance of our system so that we're reducing injuries and we have a better understanding of how our system is working for us as an organisation. Risk-based is a fairly new concept from a standard point of view, but I think it is something that we all do automatically and sometimes subconsciously. As I said before, risk is sometimes considered as a negative, but if we think about risk and we put controls in place and we identify what they are, we should then be able to change that into opportunities and give us a positive. So if we can take a negative and turn it into a positive, then that's what we need to do. But again, I think this is not something new. This is something that has been implied in the past, but is now actually being discussed in the standard. So what are the main concepts of the standard? Okay, we talked about that before. Those are the normal situations you'll find in a standard. The purpose, any references and terms and definitions. Definitions, there's a new definition of what a worker is and what the workplace is. And in particular, from the workplace point of view, it can be areas where you don't have direct control, i.e. off-site activities. The new definition of risk, as we've talked about before, risks and opportunities. If we can turn those risks into opportunities, then that's an improvement for us as an organisation. Now, participation and consultation were in the previous 18,000 standard and are in this one as well, but have been separated. And the separation is down to the definition. And if we look at participation, that's about involvement. So where you see requirements for participation, you're looking at actually involving people in that situation. Consultation is exactly what it says. It's a let's discuss it before we make any decisions. So that's basically the difference there. There's the definition of a worker, person performing work or work related under the management of the organisation. Now look at the workplace, place where the management of the organisation, where the person needs to be or go for work purposes. So think about off-site. Participation, we talked a little bit about that before, together with consultation. Risk, there's a definition of risk in there. It's the effective uncertainty. It could be consequence, it could be likelihood, and I guess a lot of organisations already have some kind of approach to risk. This is not necessarily wanting to change that approach, but just make sure that the understanding of risk is more commonly understood. Some terms and definitions. Again, there's a stakeholder in there because that comes under the context of the organisation. So there's a definition on what a stakeholder is. So you see it could be customers, owners, financial institutions, workers' unions. It could be a whole host of activities in different situations that have an effect or can have an effect on the organisation. So context. Now let's have a look at how this is split. Again, understanding the organisation and its context. What are the influences that can have? What that we can have on outside, or that what outside could have on us. And it's looking at those needs and expectations of workers and other stakeholders. And this is where it starts to expand. So let me give you an example. Let's think about a hospital. And the first thing we think about with a hospital is obviously the patients. But now let's spread that out to other stakeholders. And we've got not only the nurses and doctors that are there, but we've also got the patients' families, because they come to visit the hospital. Then we've got all the support services for the patients that come out of there. So you see how it begins to expand, and we need to think about who are the actual stakeholders. Then let's have a look at the scope of this system. Typically, the understanding of a scope is something that's on the certificate that we have on the wall. This is slightly different. The scope of the system is what is it that we cover. So if we have remote sites, multi-sites, it covers those if we want to make the system more applicable. And then our actual management system that we have in terms of what documentation do we have and how does that operate. You'll notice that in the detail, there's not a requirement to have a health and safety manual. They've taken that away, as they have done in quality and environment. If you have a one, you can keep it if it works for you. But remember, this documentation structure that supports this system is for you as an organization. It's not there because the standard asks for it or the auditor's asking for it. It's there for you as the organization. Leadership and worker participation. I said before, there's a big focus on leadership, and here is where it's expected to be identified. There are certain things that leadership are supposed to do, and the standard talks generally about top management being able to support other levels in the organization, show a commitment in there, and be involved and have an understanding. So if we come to an audit situation, don't be surprised if the auditor asks to have an interview with some of the top management where they will ask them questions about their understanding of the system. Might not have happened before, but it certainly will this time. So be aware that there is a need for an awareness at top level. The policy is still a requirement, and here is where leadership put a commitment in writing as to what that health and safety policy is going to be. And there are some indications in the standard as to what it should address. Roles and responsibilities in the organisation have been there in the past, but this time we need to think about accountability within the organisation. It's no good giving people responsibility if they don't have authority. And that's one of the things where accountability comes in. So you might need to rethink or review how your roles and responsibilities are identified. Remember, again, with consultation and participation of workers, it's expected that management will involve workers at different levels in some of the developments of their system, certainly within accident investigations, and also set up some kind of operating committee so that they can be a voice for the workforce and have a two-way consultation situation. So again, it's an important aspect of leadership to be able to promote that situation. Planning, as we said before, now talks about addressing the risks and the opportunities. And you see how it's split up into the various sub-clauses where each one is addressed in particular. What are our risks? How do we identify opportunities? And then in particular, let's look at what the legal requirements and others may be that apply to our organisation. Once we understand that, we can then put some action and control measures in place that will help to minimise or remove what those risks are. Objectives and the planning, again, is a continuation of what 18,000 has asked for. What are our objectives? And here, the standard is going to make us think about what's measurable and what's achievable. Not we will be the best in the business, we will be the safest. What can be actually measured to say, yes, you're now meeting those objectives. Now, as an improvement, what are the next ones? And so it leads on to that. So measurable and monitored objectives that people are aware of and can understand. Again, risk assessment is the key element here, and the risk identification from 18,000 into research and development, workers not under direct control, i.e. remote sites, changes in knowledge and workload and company culture. All of those have an effect on risk, and then how in turn we control those risks. So it's important to understand that. From a support point of view, remember this is part of the process and we need activities to support that process. So first of all, we talk about resources and how we manage those and make sure we have sufficient resources to manage. Competence is now talking about not just the training, not just the education, and not just the experience, but the ability to combine those into, can we put all of that into practice and come up with what our roles and responsibilities are asking us to do. So competence is a little bit more than just training. Awareness, let's make sure that we have a situation that helps people become more aware of surroundings, risks, activities and controls, and then let's put those into our communication exercises, both internally and externally. Because if we consider some of the stakeholders, some of those may be legal activities. So we may have to think about what communication we give to them. And again, an auditor would be looking for decisions and justifications as to what we're doing and what we're not. Documented information, again, is there because in cases it's certainly needed, but this is more for how we control that documentation, who authorises and approves, how do we maintain control over what we've got, and then how do we manage that situation. So again, it's still a little bit of an extension from 18,000, but no real new change. Now let's look at operation, and here is where we said before, this is what we need to do. So we talk about eliminate the danger and reduce the risks. So first of all, we go back to planning and have identified what they are. Then from that identification, if there's any changes we need to do, then we have a change management situation where we're doing changes under controlled situations. And that change could be an administration, it could be a physical change. We need to think about how we're doing it. External recruitment, again, if we're using contractors, how are we controlling them? We can't just say, well, it's their responsibility and walk away and leave it, because they're working under our controlled conditions. So we need to think carefully about how we handle that. Emergency readiness and response, again, is an extension to the existing requirement in 18,000. What happens if? And we need to think about scenarios and how we overcome those should any of those happen. Process are included for control to avoid risk as a first choice. And we've got that control hierarchy there. We've got our change management, purchasing, and our contract management as well. So again, consider the main emphasis there is contract management, along with our emergency preparedness. So having gone through all of that, now we need to be able to see and assess how well we've done. So we want to look at our ability to monitor and measure. We talked about risks, we talked about objectives. We want to look and see how we're doing from those. We also need to be able to confirm to ourselves as an organisation that we're meeting the legal requirements. So again, the auditor is going to ask, let's have a look at what they are. Now let's have a look at how you think you're measuring yourself to achieve those. And again, we need to think very carefully about this, because if there is something that's not right and we're missing it, then who is it that's going to take the hit? Certainly the worker takes the hit because he's directly affected. But now it's a leadership situation. So we need to think carefully from the business point of view. We still have our internal audits, and people would need to be trained to 45,000 so that they know the differences in the standard that they're looking for. So that has to have a program and people in place who are competent to be able to audit. Management review is still there, but again, not a presentation of results, but more strategic evaluation of what have we done, what do we need to do, and where are we going in the future. So it's particularly important, and the management review should actually be the driving force of any management system. Section 10 in improvement, we look at incidents, we look at non-conformities, but in particular we look at corrective actions. Root cause and corrective action where non-conformances have been identified. A lot of organisations think if they get non-conformances, it's a black mark. The idea of that is quite old-fashioned now, and what we should be doing is looking at non-conformances as opportunities for improvement. Here is something that someone has found not quite right, then let's investigate, let's put it right, so we either reduce it or we eliminate it. And that's the first step towards the last part of the standard, our continual improvement. We need to be able to identify our processes, how we improve those processes, so that we know that we're making and getting the best out of our management system. So again, look at the risks according to the non-conformances. Let's do the investigation and then put the action in place. And again, look at the continual improvement. It looks to be a separate clause, but it's intended to emphasize the concept of ongoing improvement of the health and safety behavior of an organization. So, migration process. Here you get an idea of some of the steps that might need to be taken place. First of all, let's look at one, we need to train. We need to train the core team on not just auditing, not just implementation, but remember, we've also got to train top management to get more involved and have a better understanding. Then we want to adapt, make the processes more compliant, review our documentation and see if there's changes to be done, particularly on the third stage, the integration part. And if we have other management systems in existence, it's making sure that we update our documentation to fall in line with that. Then monitor. Now that we think we're ready, let's just check and make sure we've got things in place so that we can move forward and get our certification against 45,001. Typically, that could take up to 18 months, depending upon the size and the complexity of an organization, whether you're doing it yourselves or whether you want to use a consultant to help you implement it. As we said before, there is that 3-year period, and if you are thinking of going this way, think sooner rather than later. And at the moment, only accredited 18,000 certificates will be accepted against this one, but I know that in Australia we're considering that 4801 is almost the same. So if we have people that only have that and want to go for 45, it will be a standard migration process. So what can Bureau Veritas do? Well, we have online training programs that can be taken when needed because obviously they're online. So you're able to manage your own experience and run at your own time. We do have online tools available with the new requirements, so you can assess compliance against the clause by clause as you go through, so you get a much better appreciation of where you are. And then finally, we've got our auditing situation that can come along and do gap analysis or do your certification audit as we go. There is an opportunity to purchase some transition packs, which were very popular for 14 and 9,000. And here we have the ability to do this self-assessment where you can track your progress and you can see at what stage you're at, what is left to do. These are obviously in 3 different stages, very informative and very useful from the organizations who've used them before. So I would recommend that you think about those. And also we've got a situation where participants from this webinar would get, if you want to go 45,000, you would get your initial audit free of charge as a complimentary situation. Just a last word on the standard. If you buy the standard, there is an Annex A at the back, and that has some very good detailed guidance on all the requirements of the standard. So I would recommend that if you're thinking about it, get the standard itself and have a good look at that annex at the back. It's very informative and very useful information for you. Okay, then I think you've had enough from me droning on, so I'll hand you back to Sarah, who'll take it over from here and hand you on.
Thank you.
Look forward to having your questions later on.
The questions are coming in now. So, okay, thank you for that, Brian. I'm just handing the screen over to Adrian, and we'll let him take over for a few minutes now. Thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll keep this relatively short. Brian gave us a great rundown on the 45,001 standard. What we focus on is what are some of the practical things you can do to actually help you meet that standard. So when we first looked at the standard, we thought, wow, this is amazing. It actually reflects what we're doing already. So basically, what we're looking at, there are some key differences between 18,001 and the 45,001. It's basically, we incorporate safety in all levels of the organisation. So what we do that is we do that by providing tools that anyone within the organisation can use, whether it's a tool that looks at a dashboard where they can see what it is they've got to do, or whether it's looking at the leadership side of things where they've got to be able to keep involvement and measure what's actually going on. So as Brian said, it requires a upper management to take a stronger leadership role and basically to have more involvement. The standard is based on procedures and is also focusing on risks, and there's a fair degree of discussion of risks within the demonstration, within the previous session. Basically, what we have are tools that allow people to allows them to basically identify risks, so they can select from a list of templated risks, but they can also log new ones as well. And then they can go in and they can identify the initial risk, the residual risk, and also inside here create any actions that they may need to do. On top of that, it allows them to link the risk assessment that they're doing to other particular regulatory documents and other regulatory and other relevant documentation. And very importantly, making sure, and this is something that Brian stressed, was to make sure that you can actually log actions against those. And again, they may be opportunities, they may be negatives, but either way, you can use the action tracking module to be able to then track all of that information. That's one key area is risks, and we've been implementing a variety of risk assessment modules over many years. We have a very, very popular corporate risk assessment, and now our very heavily revamped risk assessment module, which makes it very, very easy to do those risk assessments in a way where you can do them learning from things that you've done previously by having previous templated information that you can bring into here and selecting existing information. Okay, so let's go back to that. Let's go back to the slide for a moment. Okay, one of the things that we've been looking at and focusing on also is making sure that you involve your suppliers, because you're in control of your suppliers, and you need to be in control of your suppliers because they're reporting to you. So you've got your contractors, you've got to be able to manage their risks. So what we've been doing is we've been implementing basically the contractor management processes. What we can do is basically allow a contractor to be sent a document which they can access, and they can be involved in the safety management process. So as part of evaluating a contractor, you can then go through and you can ask them to provide relevant documentation. You can ask them to then answer a whole series of queries, and then also force additional questions if they answer in the negative or in the way that you don't want them to answer. So basically, this is you can basically set it up, you can send it to the contractor, and then the contractor also has to make sure that things like their insurances and their certificates of currency, all of those things that they've answered are maintained. So if something is about to expire, the contractor will be notified to let them know that they need to provide that updated information within the system. So you can invite the contractor through an invite process to be involved in this, and then they can then go through and assess, and then you can review their assessment. So again, looking at the tools, there's a lot in the standard, but there's a lot of tools available that can help you meet the standard, and they're the sorts of things that I'm talking about now. Okay, the other aspects of the system as well, we're looking at dashboards that are available for people to be able to measure and see their performance. So, and these dashboards are fully configurable. So what's applicable to someone at an operational level will be different to someone who's at a leadership or management level. So these tabs that you see here will vary. They may have things on risk assessments. They may have things on hazards and actions. People can very, very easily see where they're heading, what is it that they're required to do. And you'll notice that these little badges on the left, these are telling people who log in, what are the things that I need to be addressing myself, or I can look at them all in one place in the My Activities section. The dashboards, in a software solution need to be configurable. You need to be able to show the information that the relevant person needs to see at the appropriate level. One of the other things is that Brian mentioned, and there's so many things that I started because there's so many things to cover in a very, very short period of time. Things like change management. So we have change management modules. So when you do implement a change, you can measure the effect of that change. You can go through the due diligence of how you're doing that. Some of the other just items on here, which I'll cover very briefly, increased worker participation. So one of the ways of getting increased worker participation, historically, people have said, well, they can't sit behind a PC. It's not feasible. They've got to be out in the field doing their job. So for that reason, what we're basically looking at is ways in which people can be using the system on their mobile device. So when you're looking at a mobile device, they should be able to, and I'll just resize this slightly. This is on my iPhone, but it could be on an Android device as well. They need to be able to see what are their activities, what are the things that have been assigned to them. They need to be able to go and do activities very easily. So if you give them the tools to participate and then you assign things to them, then they've got their mobile devices, they can then go and do those things. So if they need to do an inspection, for example, they can go through and they can do an inspection. And I'm just very quickly just selecting a few different items in here. If they need to put in more details, or if they need to take pictures or photos, they can do those sorts of things. So the app, the mobile side of things, allows and facilitates that participation by the worker. It allows them to see what are the things that are assigned to them. It sends them buzzing push notifications when things are due to make sure that they know that they have to do it, or email notifications. So, and then you can measure that participation. You can see on your dashboards exactly who's done what and who hasn't done what. Okay, I'll leave that there for my presentation. What I want to say in summary is the 45,001 standard is exciting. It produces a lot of opportunities for improvement. We see that we've got a lot of practical solutions that can be implemented with safety software. And what I'll do now is I'll pass back to Sarah and leave the session back to answering questions.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, I think the first question is for Brian. Will there be a booklet available that steps you through the different sets of questions similar to the National Self-Insurer OH&S Management Systems Audit Tool version 3? The booklet I refer to has terrific examples for the auditor to look for and questions to ask.
Right. I guess there'll be a widespread splash of different checklists and booklets across the range, because with the new standard, everything comes out the woodwork. All I can suggest for that is to have a look at our transition pack, because that's an Excel workbook that's split into all the sections. It has very detailed questions that organisations need to ask themselves. It gives them the opportunity to measure whether I'm 25, 50, 75% or 100%. And then at the end of that, I can then say, okay, can BV come along and do a gap analysis just to check and make sure I'm correct and where I am. So I think the transition packs are good because it allows organisations to move at their own pace. It shows the status that they're at, and some things will be done faster than others, which is fine, but at least it gives organisations the opportunity to see where they are and what have they got left to do in a specific time frame.
Okay. Wayne also asked, will there be an Excel recording document to record findings and non-conformances, observations and opportunities for improvement?
Not unless he wants to develop one himself, or he uses what Adrian's discussed, and there may be something there. But certainly from a 45,001 point of view, it will not be prescriptive. It will want the organisation to develop its own system, which is natural, so that everyone can then understand it and make it work for them.
Yeah, one of the things that was mentioned was non-conformance, and the environment that I was showing you before is a fully configurable environment, and that's one of the things that I didn't mention. So the idea with our Viking platform is that it's fully configurable, so you can change the platform to meet your specific processes. So if you've got a specific non-conformance process or any of those other things, rather than dealing with spreadsheets, which are actually very difficult to share and difficult to get involvement in with the rest of the organisation, when you've got a automated system, you can very easily get involvement, have email notifications going to people when they need to be aware of different things. Sorry, Sarah, I'll pass back to you.
I just wanted to also, I didn't earlier introduce, Charlene is also working with Bureau Veritas and helping me answer some of these questions. So one of the questions that she has answered by text is, what's the basis of only migration from 18,001? Surely if you demonstrate compliance to 45001, it doesn't matter what system you had previously, and or if you are being certified directly to 45,001. And she's answered yes, correct to that. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Brian?
No, I think what Charlene said is quite right. It doesn't matter what you've had in the past or what you haven't had in the past. As long as you can demonstrate the requirements of 45,000, then you should not have any issue in getting a certificate. Okay.
And Erin has asked, do you have packs that help with implementation, not just transition? We currently don't have accredited SMS. Charlene has said, yes, we do on our website. I think, Charlene, you can either put that link in the chat panel here now, but also put that on your email following this webinar. That would be great.
It's also at the end of the presentations on the slides that will be sent.
Oh, great. Okay. Liliana asked, what is the average cost of this digital tool? And Charlene has answered that's also on that link that she will be giving. Laura asked, does the mobile app work offline at all? It most certainly does. That's a key consideration. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Adrian?
Yes, basically it works offline, and you can actually configure each of the modules as to what module you actually want to work online, or in fact, which modules you want to be available on the mobile app at all, and then which modules you want to be able to work offline. So, for example, all your documentation, all your information can be operated offline. And when you come back online, if you've done something using the mobile app and you've hit the submit button and a notification is due to go out, as soon as you get back online, those notifications are then sent out, and any new information is then added and synchronized back into the mobile app. So yes, you can decide whether online and whether offline access is available on a case-by-case basis yourself through the configuration tool.
Okay. Christian asked, what are the main gaps you have found in the first transition audits that you've conducted? Brian?
I think this varies from organisation to organisation, because with 18,000, if it's already been in place, or 48, or whatever country's association with that, a lot of it will already have been in place. I think the focus change is leadership involvement. Now, traditionally, and I say that with a pinch of salt, traditionally it's always been difficult to get top management involved in any management system. Doesn't work all the time, but if there is a sticking point, it'll be them getting an understanding of what their responsibilities are in this new management system. Remember, I said before, don't be surprised if the auditor wants to spend half an hour talking to top management about their understanding and their involvement and how can they demonstrate that. So I would think that would be a typical sticking point for some people to understand and get over with.
Thank you. Tony has asked, is there any particular sticking point with compatibility between 45001 and 4801?
Not really. 45 is a kind of like extension. If we think 48 and 18,000 are very, very close, and there's only a couple of issues that are slightly different. If we migrate that into 45, then no, there isn't any particular issues that would be incompatible. We just might have a little bit more to do, but it shouldn't be any particular problem.
Nitin asks, worker participation seems to be the biggest challenge. How best can it be handled?
Well, again, here we've got to look at the size and complexity of any organisation. Some workers will demand participation, and probably through union organisations, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you have to drive participation because sometimes workers are not interested. So you get variations on a theme, but I do think organisations can be creative. We can establish worker participation groups. We can have toolbox talks that we get people involved with. And if we make it a two-way conversation, then we should be able to get feedback from the people to see what it is that they want, what they're looking for, what's achievable, and then what can we actually do to help meet that. Where there are some things that we can't, communication kicks in by coming back to people to say, sorry, we can't do that because. And I think lack of communication is one of the biggest problems any organisation has. We don't communicate effectively. Okay,
with regards to the high-level structure, how easy would it be for organisations to integrate the ISO 4511 with ISO 14001? And that question is from Shola.
Right, that is extremely easy, because if you see the structure, it's exactly the same in 14,000, and you'll probably find that some of the words are the same. So if we take the common themes like analysis, management review, internal audit, policy, objectives, those are the ones that are going to be common across all the standards. So the only slight differences will be in a particular standard, what is the focus of that standard. So environment would obviously focus on there from an operational point of view. Quality focuses slightly differently, where it has possibly design involved in that. 45, again, will focus on the nature of the standard into more health and safety. But the overarching idea is that a lot of the context in the standard is the same as the others, which makes it much easier to integrate.
Okay, Andy asks, has anyone in Australia been successfully certified to ISO 45001 to date?
Yes, there has. I think there's been about half a dozen organisations that have followed this through from the draft stage, and as soon as it goes live, then bang, people go for it. So I think initially there are some. We are finding a lot more interest in it. So I'm hoping that people will do what I said and act early rather than late if this is the way they want to go.
Okay. And Anna said, could Brian please elaborate more on the expectations of leadership that the standard or an auditor would expect?
I think an auditor would want to expect that leadership, A, understand the objectives and where they are in a particular relation to achieving them. How are you promoting your health and safety within the organisation? Are you supporting? Are you assisting? Do you attend meetings? Are you getting feedback and information? So really the emphasis would go from what was traditionally maybe a health and safety manager to now coming into top management. That's not to say we still don't need a health and safety manager, but it's the awareness now. Because in the past, the health and safety manager has been the one that's had the information more often than not in his head. And if they move to another organisation or retire, there's normally a big void in the understanding of how the system works. The idea of shifting the focus into top management across the board in all standards is so that that gap in knowledge is not as big as it perhaps used to be in the past. So at least there's a broader understanding of what the requirements are, what my involvement is as manager, and how I'm helping to promote the understanding throughout the organisation.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We've gone quite over time, so we'll wrap it up now. I just want to a quick thank you to Charlene and Brian for helping make this event, helping to organise it. And Brian, do you have anything else to say before we wrap?
No, I think for this situation, that's about as much as I can do at this stage. I think any further questions, then you'll obviously have Charlene's address. You've got some information coming to you through the slides. Go through those. If there's anything else, don't hesitate to let us know.
Okay. Adrian, anything from you?
No, that's pretty much from me. I think basically there's some exciting things there, and there are some practical solutions out there, so that you should keep in mind to make that transition a lot easier. Okay,
thank you, Adrian. From my point of view, as I said, both organisations will be sending out emails. We'll send a link for webinar attendees to get hold of a free trial of MyOsh software, so you can have a look yourself how that works, and also a link to have a quick online demo with a consultant who can answer any specific questions about your own requirements. So that'll come out after in a recording. So and if you want to ask any questions, obviously, as well. Okay, thank you for joining us, everyone. Good night, good morning, good afternoon, and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.